Ou deixa sua bunda ardendo, ou dá tapa, 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 cara.
Welcome to Empowerment Unleashed Now, exploring your inner authority. I'm Michelle Jones.
And I'm Scott Collins.
And this is the place to connect with your highest, most essential self, your most empowered self, where you can explore your inner authority and learn from others and learn more about yourself.
We talk with fascinating people from all walks of life about transformation, healing, hypnosis, astrology, physical experience of being human, and heart-centered living.
We're so thankful that you're here with us. Let's dive right on in. Hi, and welcome to Empowerment Unleashed Now. I'm Michelle Jones, and I'm here with my spiritual study buddy,
Scott Collins.
Hi, Scott Collins, my soul sidekick. And today, we're bridging the heart of Cancer season, and we're moving ahead with bold love and light, headed towards Leo season. And we're going to have a conversation about consciousness, courage, and kind of our sacred journey beyond the veil, if you will. And we are at episode 39 today, which is kind of, I'm happy about that number today, but we're titling that From the Heart to the Light, and it's Consciousness, Courage, and the Afterlife. And we are here with Dr. Eben Alexander, who is an author, a best-selling author. He is a neurosurgeon and someone that I think has had an extraordinary awakening that has, I would imagine, created an exceedingly different degree of empowerment from within himself. And we are just very thankful and very blessed to have him here with us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander, for being with us.
Well, Michelle and Scott, it's a great treasure to be with you today. I'm glad we have this chance to talk.
Thank you, sir. The first question that we usually start with is, what are you feeling most empowered in or within your life today?
Oh, I would say it's an ongoing and increasing transformational understanding of the nature of free will and power of the soul. This is something that was very foreign to my kind of thinking before my near-death experience back in 2008. But because of that very powerful experience, which of course I talked about in the book Proof of Heaven and have talked about in many, many podcasts and interviews, it completely flipped by 180 degrees my kind of notion of the brain, mind, free will, all these things, and showed me the power of belief and how important kind of our consciousness and our free will is in determining our emerging reality. And believe me, that's a giant surprise for someone who formerly subscribed to a kind of conventional materialist scientific position, that only the physical world exists. And in fact, when that materialist philosophy is taken to its extreme, what it'll tell you is you don't even have free will because it's all just chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain. So it's a very kind of bleak and paltry fiction. And that's why the NDE community and the modern emerging science of consciousness has helped me on a daily basis to come to realize how empowering this notion of primacy of mind really is.
Yes. Primacy of mind. Primacy of mind. Yeah, this is fascinating because so selfishly, Dr. Alexander, I am heading to Oklahoma tomorrow. I have a dear friend who passed away quite suddenly, unexpectedly. And she was healthy and just had a massive stroke in her sister's kitchen. And she lost consciousness. And she never regained consciousness, right? As we call consciousness here. So in that period of time, it's just fascinating that you're here now, right? Because of course, like God aligns things in that way and it's all perfect divine timing. But I thought to myself, of course, as anyone within that circumstance, you know, where is Brenda? You know, what is she experiencing right now?
Mhm.
What is consciousness? What is life? Where is the soul in all of this? Because she was an organ donor.
Mhm.
So there were a period of days to make sure, she was not going to regain consciousness, all of those things that medically you have to make certain before you harvest. She saved 4 people's lives. She was able to donate 2 kidneys, liver, and tissue, which is incredible. And, that raises in and of itself the connectedness of the soul, the mission, the whole thing. And the fact that you're here, like you can answer, like, where was Brenda? Is just a very profound gift that I just wanted to share before we dive into some of your NDE experience and how you went from being a materialist to being a spiritualist. And I would imagine shifting empowerment from the head to the heart.
Right. Well, that's very much a huge part of it is recognizing the conscious awareness. This whole notion that we exist is kind of a profound mystery. And it turns out that what I recognized in my NDE, and we can get into the details in a few minutes, but it really had to do with the fact that I had a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis that should have killed me. And the good thing about meningitis is it's a perfect model for human death because it attacks the whole outer surface of the brain, the neocortex. And surprising to me, who formerly subscribed to materialist kind of thinking in my scientific training, my conscious awareness actually expanded tremendously when that was happening. Materialist science would postulate as your brain goes down, your awareness goes down. And when your brain is gone, your awareness is zero. But in fact, the brain is more of a kind of a shackles or a restrictor of activity. And so, in many ways, I was witnessing this tremendous kind of expansion of soul, expansion of conscious awareness beyond the kind of simplistic little ego version of existence that we have living in these bodies. And what I would say in answer to your question is that is where your friend is in that kind of spiritual home. It's a place of great comfort and love and light. It's a place that is very reassuring. It's where we reconnect with souls of departed loved ones. It's where we go through life reviews. The life review is an extremely important concept when you study it scientifically. Life reviews occur at about 50% or so of NDEs, depending on what series you look at. That number varies a little bit, but I would say roughly half of NDEs can have a very strong life review component. And the details of that are what are so interesting. There's a paper that Bruce Grayson, he's an MD, skeptical MD psychiatrist who studied NDEs for the last 45 years or so. And in a paper he wrote in the Journal of Near-Death Studies in the fall of 2021, he discusses almost 700 life reviews that he'd encountered in more than 1,000 NDEs that he had in his data bank. And a few points I'd like to make about the life review because they really do kind of take us to a new level. The me before coma as a materialist neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, I would have said, oh, life review, that's just imagination, wishful thinking. It's not real. It's a hallucination. And I would have been dead wrong because in Grayson's data, 1/3 of people who have life reviews actually go through a review of their entire life. And you might think, oh, wait a minute, how can you go through your entire life during, say, a 10-minute cardiac arrest? Well, the reason is once you're in that spiritual realm, you're completely outside of earth time. You're no longer a slave. There are kind of temporal causal orderings there, but that is an area where birth, death, everything in between is simultaneously presented to you, including past lives and including events that are potential for future lives. So all of that being presented simultaneously gives you a much richer kind of whole soul view of what's going on. It's one of the reasons these things are so difficult to put into words. Um, the other points I'd like to make that come from Bruce Grayson's data about life reviews is that roughly 3/4 of people say it's more real than this earthly existence. And about 3/4 of people also say that a life review is going back through the main events of one's life that still hold any kind of teaching potential um, from the perspective of everyone involved. That's very important. This is 3/4 of life reviews that it's from the perspective of others. I like to say it's like we're sharing the dream of the one mind. But the big message there is the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. That is written into the very fabric of the universe through these fairly common life reviews that people come back and report. And so the old kind of conventional materialist scientific process of simply ignoring these things and, oh, it's hallucinations. People imagine all kinds of things, wishful thinking. Well, when you run into that kind of data and studying hundreds of NDEs and life reviews, you start to realize there's something far more powerful going on here. And it's not just that we're trying to pretend that there's a physical world and that our mind simply gives us access to the physical world. But when you're reliving events of your life like that, and you're reliving it from the perspective of everybody involved, you recognize that handing out pain and suffering to others, when you feel that on the receiving end during the life review, you go, no, this is wrong. So treat others as you would like to be treated should be a maxim for our lives in general. Once you realize that this is the way the world works and we have a responsibility for our actions that the universe is paying attention to, and also I'll simply point out that it's common in the scientific study of NDEs to say that people come back more spiritual but less religious. Now, that's not to put down religion, because religion can be a wonderful source of spirituality. But sadly, in our modern world, and actually in the last 2,000 years, religions have been used for very nefarious purposes. They clearly had nothing to do with the original message of the prophets about oneness, connection, and the binding force of love. And that's what NDEs and the scientific study of consciousness, with the NDEs at the tip, as a tip of the spear, really open us up to a much grander kind of vision of who we are, spiritual beings in a spiritual universe that have responsibilities of love, compassion, kindness, and mercy, when necessary, forgiveness, in all of our dealings with our fellow beings, which is quite contrary to a lot of the craziness you see in our modern world, the polarization, the warfare, conflict, violence. Those are all results of the false sense of separation that comes from materialist thought. So this revolution of scientists studying NDEs, coming to a deeper understanding of what our existence is all about and of our power of will to influence our emerging reality. I think all of that is very important to us, especially in the current era.
Oh, gosh.
It's so exciting to hear modern science like stepping in and having evidence now to validate like what the ancients knew really all along, that the concept of linear time is imaginary and it's not linear. It is relativistic, it is quantum, and in 10 minutes an infinity can be experienced, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, so it's like when in like you experience it from that perspective. And then that's really amazing hearing you share about how the meningitis went after the outer membrane, but then actually you felt more conscious and aware. So that could also further validate the notion and idea that our highest wisdom and consciousness actually exists more in our heart intelligence and solar plexus intelligence, and that vagal nerve connecting it to our pineal gland. Then the deeper part of the brain is where our real consciousness and awareness exists.
Well,
That part of the brain is just the observer of it all.
And it's important to point out the kind of emerging scientific view of that is that the brain is not the producer of consciousness. It is simply a transceiver. It allows us to access consciousness and memory, I'll point out, because, for example, in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is a third book I've written since my near-death experience, Karen Newell and I go into great detail about the brain is a filter, and that consciousness is actually primordial. I mean, that's one of the simplest and most straightforward lessons of NDEs. In other words, the physical universe emerges from conscious awareness. That's why the universe has the kind of power to show us. And when we leave the physical body and our consciousness actually expands to that much greater level, it's no longer confined by the kind of egoic confines of our brain. We start to realize who we truly are. And that's where our mind easily overlaps with the minds of departed loved ones. That's one of the most universal ingredients in NDEs across all cultures, going back thousands of years across all continents, is the appearance of loved ones who have passed from this world. It happened to my own mother, my adoptive mother, who passed from this world in April 2019 at the age of 99. She had a profound vision 2 nights before she passed of her own mother appearing to her. And when I heard that from the nurse, I went, okay, this is it. Let's get home because she's ready to go. And 2 days later, she ended up leaving this world. But it's a very, very common thing. And of course, the me before coma, as this materialist neuroscientist, would have been telling you, oh, it's wishful thinking. You see who you want to see on the way out. And I would have been dead wrong. For example, I've found since all this work began for me in the last 7 or 8 years, I've learned of what are called shared death experiences, which are like near-death experiences in many ways. There are some subtle differences, but the big reality is they happen to perfectly healthy people. It could be a healthcare worker who's working with a dying patient, who then has this coexistence of their souls, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review. Likewise, it often happens with the loved ones. And the loved one can be 1,000 miles away. It doesn't matter, because in that spiritual space, distance, physical distance and time distance are not limiting at all. It's a much grander kind of experience. And these shared crossings, as they're called, are shared death experiences. You can go to sharedcrossing, I think .org. I think that's the website for William Peters' work. He wrote a book called At Heaven's Door. And that's all about shared death experiences. The phenomenon of shared death was actually first noted by Raymond Moody. Raymond Moody, the father of NDEs, he's the one who wrote the book Life After Life back in 1975. He's a very close friend of ours, he and Cheryl. And Moody started collecting these shared death cases way back in the 70s. When he collected all the near-death cases. But it took him a longer time because shared death are not as common, but they're extraordinary because they completely dismiss the materialist pseudo-explanation that tries to pretend that it's decreasing oxygen tension in the brain, increasing CO2, the physiologic changes of somebody who's in extremis, who's near death, that then would cause these hallucinations, as they call them. But in a shared death, the people are usually very healthy who are there accompanying the soul of someone who's dying. And even to the point of seeing a full-blown life review, that's pretty astonishing. But these, as scientists study these kind of cases, we start to discover a far grander fabric for who we are and what this is all about.
I would be curious, and I don't know if this has been in any of the research with the shared death experiences, but the people that are the healthy ones that aren't exiting or like didn't exit, are they also experiencing that DMT release, pineal gland DMT release that those that actually do experience death have?
Well, for one,
has there been any research into that?
It's important to point out they experience a lot of the very same.
I wonder if they are. I wonder if they're excreting DMT as well.
Well, let's back off 1 second. But the DMT thing, it's very important to point out. I participated in a study, a personal study, because of Sam Harris. Back when my case first came out, Proof of Heaven was published in 2012. Mm-hmm. And Sam Harris, in his blog posting, said, oh, Alexander just had a DMT trip. This is what happens when you die. The pineal dumps a bunch of DMT, and the end of story. And that's a very simplistic and materialist explanation that doesn't remotely cover the power of what's going on. So materialism can be a trap. And of course, we all want to know the brain mechanisms. And there are brain mechanisms that correlate with the phenomenological experiences, but they're not causal. That's very important. the molecules, the cells in the brain, they are not causing this phenomenal experience. They are simply serving as that transceiver that allows the spiritual experience that has far grander kind of implications and coordination with a soul's journey. That's what they're serving to do. So yeah, you might find echoes of that in the form of DMT and things like that, but don't start falling into the trap of thinking that DMT is causal, because
Yeah.
that is a short circuit.
No, I think it's a byproduct.
Bypass.
Yeah, I feel like it's a byproduct. Maybe it's something that allows you to more easily access the euphoric state as you experience the spiritual thing you're talking about. That is the innate experience. Yeah.
Well, and it's really a more question of what comes first, the cart or the horse. But it's
Right.
causality.
Yeah.
And that's where, for example, neuroscience has come to realize that neuroplasticity, the ability of neurons to form new connections in the brain, the new wiring, even as we're adults. When I was in training in the 70s and 80s, they thought that the brain was pretty much fully developed after early childhood, that you got no new neurons, and it was a very simplistic view of how the brain worked, and we've learned a lot more about that. But neuroplasticity is not the origin of kind of these enhanced abilities. Neuroplasticity is the result of top-down causality, of mental causation. This is why your beliefs are very important. For people who believe this is all nonsense, woo-woo, wishful thinking, forget about it, they're going to have very hard trouble demonstrating to themselves the reality of this. And many of them end up in kind of a limited state when they leave the physical body at the time of death. They get stuck because their belief system kind of sticks them there. And this is why our beliefs are so important. And to open your mind to believe in possibilities is a very important part of this process we're talking about. And this is where I would like to point out to your audience the importance of meditation, of going within, centering prayer. Once you realize that your mind is not simply created by a 3.5-pound gelatinous mass floating in a warm, dark bath between my ears, but that your mind is really the mind of the universe, and that we share that with all fellow sentient beings, and that we're connected to them in deep and profound ways that become very clear in the dying process, but they're there all along. So meditation, centering prayer are ways of going into mind and putting the little ego voice. This is very important. The voice in your head is not your consciousness. It is not your soul. The voice in your head is your ego mind for most of us. And that I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, calls that voice in your head the annoying roommate.
The roommate.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. And for me, in meditation, and for those who need a tool, I would recommend Sacred Acoustics binaural beat brainwave entrainment. You can learn more at sacredacoustics.com. It's something we discuss a whole lot in the book Living in a Mindful Universe, because my co-author of that book, Karen Newell, who's also my wife, is the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics. And she knows a tremendous amount of sound-enhanced meditation. But meditation is a very important way to put that little ego voice into timeout, because meditation is all about essentially not letting that ego voice run the show. The ego has the main tools of fear and anxiety. The ego is absolutely wrapped up in all addictions: addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, addiction to work, addiction to sex, addiction to love, addiction to exercise. People can get addicted to all kinds of things. And it's always an ego toxicity there, and the ego making excessive demands. And so for me, meditation is a way of rising above that ego mind, leaving it in timeout, patting on the back. You don't want to, damage it. I mean, our ego is there for some reasons, but ultimately we're much more than that ego and much more than that voice in our heads. And this is why taking 20 or 30 minutes a day to meditate can be very, very powerful. And if, like I said, if you need a tool, Sacred Acoustics is a very good tool. It's a form of binaural beats. And the reason they work so well is because they cause this powerful oscillation in the lower brainstem. And I believe that is what basically allows us to liberate our conscious awareness during a time of deep meditation using binaural beats like Sacred Acoustics, is that powerful oscillation back and forth. in the lower brainstem. It's something that's used in hypnosis, for example. People are familiar with the idea of a pendulum in the eyes. Following the pendulum is another way of engaging that. In that case, you're using the midbrain. And with Sacred Acoustics and binaural beats, we're going even lower in the brainstem to even more powerful and more primitive circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago. It's one of the reasons why I think binaural beat brainwave entrainment is such a powerful technique for getting people into a transcendental state of conscious awareness. But for me, it's been essential over the last 11, 12 years. I've meditated an hour or two a day. Whatever you have time for, 5-10 minutes is a good start. Although, luckily I have more time these days. So, but going within has been a powerful way to reconnect with my NDE, not just to harvest memories from it, but to develop relationships with the guides and, the wisdom, that God force at the core of it all, and to then bring that back to this world. For me, meditation is absolutely essential. And especially with all the trauma and, angst associated with our modern existence and all the polarization in this world, something like Sacred Acoustics is a very powerful tool. There's, for example, a pilot study in the peer-reviewed scientific literature by Dr. Anna Yusim in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in January of 2020 that studied Sacred Acoustics tones in a busy New York, Manhattan psychiatric practice to alleviate anxiety. And Dr. Yusim found a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms in her patients over 2 weeks of listening. And that's compared to an only 7% reduction that happened in the control group. The control group got standard psychotherapy, but without the tones. So simply by listening to these tones, you had this incredible increase in the alleviation of anxiety. And I promise you, that's just the very first effect of many other things that can be the benefit of getting in touch with kind of your higher soul and your higher abilities.
This is just a profound dive. There's so many tools that you've just like offered our listeners that they can tap for themselves, and the importance of that in terms of meditation and practice, whatever that inward prayer. Um, Scott and I call it like a martial arts bag. So, we've talked about the power of meditation, breath work, prayer, like putting that into your martial arts bag, right? So, Dr. Alexander has just given you like some tools that are very sacred and apparently very, very needed along this journey that we're experiencing in Earth School with our ascension. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, Dr. Alexander, was as I was reading Proof of Heaven, I really wanted to delve a little bit into some of the what you brought back initially, because I'd like to really acknowledge the courage living in a medical scientific community as you did prior to the NDE, and then the integration of the experience and just the beginning of dialoguing about it from even like with your son, you know, um, i- this is not typical. Many people would have walked through that experience and possibly kept it within just their family, right?
Right. Well, the problem is it was way too big to keep contained.
Yes.
And part of the picture, if you read our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I tell the story there of how a few weeks after I woke up from this coma, to the surprise of my doctors, um, and all the healthcare workers who knew about my case, they invited me to my morbidity mortality conference. Those are the conferences we have in medicine where you talk about the tough cases, the people who died, the people who were horribly affected by something. And so here I am talking about my own.
Your own.
They wanted to hear my story. How did this happen? And not only that, it was so legendary at the hospital where I worked in Lynchburg that the County Medical Society asked me to give a dinner talk at the club there And I gave a talk to about 120 doctors and their spouses, and they were fascinated by this. So I had a huge scientific support from the get-go of people who recognized this was absolutely extraordinary what I went through. And, there was no way to pretend that the way
It was anything else.
it's happened. And another example of kind of the scientific community around this is that there were 3 doctors working at UVA in the Division of Perceptual Study at the University of Virginia, which has been around since the late 1960s. And they've studied in great depth and scientific rigor reincarnation, past life memories in children, near-death experiences, after-death communication, psychokinesis, telepathy, all these things they've studied and have a major scientific basis to show the reality of this. And in fact, 3 scientists from that group were so interested in my case. They weren't involved in my medical treatment, but they were fascinated by my recovery. And so they reviewed my medical records, and that was published in Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in September of 2018. By Dr. Serby Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson. And the important things to know about that case report, for one thing, when you read the details of the Glasgow coma scales, the results of the scans, lab values, my neurologic exams, which were horrible from the get-go. My brainstem was badly damaged, my entire neocortex affected. Basically, it paints a horrific picture, but one of a brain that could not possibly muster any kind of dream or hallucination. That's very important.
Yes.
That's why, in fact, people who try and take me down, try and discredit me and disprove my story, insist that I had a medically induced coma because they recognize that to the scientific community, one of the most important features of my coma is it was caused by meningitis destroying my neocortex. That makes all the difference in the world, especially when you look at the kind of recovery I had. And so dream or hallucination is off the table. It's impossible, that kind of brain. This is what haunted me when I came back to the world and was reviewing my own medical records. Because my doctors had told me, when I came out of coma and I'm trying to tell them my spiritual experience, they said, oh, you can forget about it. Your brain was soaking in pus. In fact, we have no idea how you're coming back to us. But the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. And I was also, an important thing about my coma journey was I was amnesic. It's very unusual. I've never heard of an NDE where somebody had that much amnesia for their life, but I came to recognize in the years afterwards that was crucial for me accepting the whole thing as it occurred as real. And so initially, I just thought, well, my doctors told me that the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. It took about 2 months for my knowledge of neuroscience, quality physics to come back to me after the coma. And that case report, importantly, when they wrote it, the peer review editors of the scientific journal said, but wait a minute, how in the world do you explain this? It's unprecedented to have somebody this ill from gram-negative bacterial meningitis and then make a full recovery after a week in deep coma. How do you explain that? And they said it's because he had a near-death experience. So the scientific review board goes, oh, now we have an explanation. But note how important that is, that the scientific review editors are now explaining this case of miraculous recovery by admitting that a spiritual journey played a role. That shows maturity of the medical profession in finally coming to recognize the power of all this. And that's what all of us should pay attention to, is the kind of healing you get in miraculous healing in NDEs, not just my case, but for example, Anita Moorjani, who wrote the book Dying to Be Me. Her stage 4 advanced lymphoma basically disappeared after a very spiritual NDE. Or Dr. Mary C. Neal, she wrote a book called To Heaven and Back. And she had a profound, very Christian NDE and came back to this world after an over 30-minute warm water drowning. Ask any doctor what your brain is going to look like after 30 minutes of warm water drowning. They'll say it's turning to mush. Well, she was brought to the surface dead, but they resuscitated her and she ended up going back to full-time practice as an orthopedic surgeon, but also like me and like Anita, goes around the world sharing these stories with other people because this is a giant wake-up call for humanity. There were spiritual beings in a spiritual universe from a modern scientific view. If you want to explain quantum physics, if you want to explain all these kind of experiences that humans have, especially around death and dying, and then communications from after death. And then, of course, all that tremendous literature on reincarnation. And you might say, well, I don't believe in reincarnation because I don't remember a past life. Well, guess what? As the doctors who study these cases will tell you, that's Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker. And now they're new, younger people taking over, thank God. But as they will tell you that these memories in these children start to be covered over by natural processes at age 6 or 7. So usually after that age, the children don't remember past lives anymore. Well, that's true for all of us. Many of us have past life memories when we're young. We know
Yes.
it existed before. And
Yes.
yet, in our culture especially, such a thing is suppressed because the materialist paradigm of the 20th and early 21st century said that's nonsense. The brain creates consciousness. And when your brain dies, your consciousness goes away. Well, they're just dead wrong. They just were not paying attention to all the evidence in the form of thousands and thousands of reports that deny that. And many of these reports cannot be filed under wishful thinking or hallucination because there's way too much going on, that things that they know that they couldn't possibly know, that they learn because they're in this exotic state of interconnected minds. So the world is waking up to this. The good news is that religions have had thousands of years to teach us the golden rule, to treat others as you would like to be treated. And now with NDEs, near-death experiences, serving as the tip of the spear, but also all the other kind of phenomena to be explored, shared death experiences, after-death communications, all these past life memories in children, showing us reincarnation is a natural part of human existence. Well, guess what? The world needs to mature and grow up, especially because of all the polarization in our modern world. Warfare, violence, conflict is all a symptom of the false sense of separation that's inherent in materialist thought. It pretends that, consciousness is here in this little brain and my little ego, and I exist in this own little pocket. And when that ends, I end. Well, they're wrong because we're eternal spiritual beings. We're here for a reason. It's all about love, compassion, kindness, mercy, taking care of each other. These are important lessons for the modern human to learn because this is the pathway forward.
It's so important. It is our pathway forward. This is where humanity, like you said, it's like a wake-up call. And one of the things that I wanted to reinforce for listeners that you said, I was a Montessori educator for 12 years prior, I to what I do now, which is, a lot of hypnotherapy, counseling, and just sitting with people. One of the things that you said is about small children, up to the age of 6 or 7, and the absorbent minds, of just, like they're the only people on the planet that learn a language orally. Like they're pretty incredible beings. And indeed, the experiences, I think, of millennial parents now with their children, or even Gen Zers with their children, I have them coming into my office regularly and dialoguing, and so it's like the millennial parents is acknowledging that the young child is sharing a part of their soul, in a previous incarnation. And, like, Michelle, what do you think about this? And, I remember with my own child when he was 4, and he was somebody who was verbal, but he was also more of an experiencer and didn't, certain words, he had a little trouble with. By the time he was 5, we couldn't stop him. But at 4, he was just driving in the car with me one day from preschool. We were headed home, and he says, "Mama, to get an island, do you need to have a lot of artillery, or do you need to have a lot of material resources like money?" And I looked in the rearview mirror and I said, Jake Reardon, I think that you probably need both. And he said, "That's what I thought, Mama." And he just went back to looking out the window, you know? And I was so clear in my own, parenting moment that he was expressing something from a soul level that he was still seeking clarity on, or possibly he wanted to try to recreate in this. And he was wondering about his existence on another timeline and another
Right.
plane. And just the acknowledgement of it, as opposed to really prying, there was an acceptance. And I feel like that is part of an ascension process, an awakening of humanity. And, in my generation as a Gen Xer, maybe I was the parent that did that. And there were, 10% of us that were doing that. I feel like with the millennials now, you're seeing a significant shift in that acknowledgement and that golden rule. Children seem to really get that in a far more profound way than we do.
Well, they do, absolutely. And children, I mean, you're right. We just had a visit from our grandkids, a 7.5-year-old boy and a 1.5-year-old girl.
Oh, sweet.
Whoa, they just left this morning. So I'm still riding on that beautiful energy. But yeah, you bring up some very interesting points. And as resources for your audience, I would recommend, for example, the book by Jim Tucker, who's done the reincarnation studies at UVA for the last 15 years or so. He wrote a book called Before, and I highly recommend it. It's many cases that he's vetted. There's one in particular, a case that also is a separate book. And this one was somewhat vetted by Jim Tucker, although not fully. But the book I'm referring to, it's by Kathy Bird, and it's called The Boy Who Knew Too Much. And the reason I mention it is you had mentioned a few minutes ago, kind of about souls together. People recognizing in this lifetime that they've been together before. And The Boy Who Knew Too Much is a fantastic story about exactly that. And it's about a famous athlete, and I won't give any more out about that. But the story is very compelling that these two souls reincarnated together. And I think it's an important concept. It's not one that's as commonly demonstrated in that literature, but I'm a firm believer that we exist in soul groups and that we actually make kind of soul agreements.
Yes.
And the important thing to get is that the agreements about what's going to happen in our life that we're going to work through together as this group of souls, of course, we'll be ignorant to that. We won't have that knowledge of the higher souls when we're living these lives. But important to point out that much of the kind of milepost and energy that drives our progress is from hurdles, challenges, illness, injury, things that in this world we look at as tough, why'd this happen to me kind of stuff. And yet, when you look back on your life, often you recognize that those hardships and difficulties were the catalysts that allow you to go through tremendous soul growth. And that's why I encourage people to embrace the hardships, to kind of use meditation and prayer to ask, God, the universe, what am I to learn from this? What is the purpose of this particular challenge in my life? And when I look back on my own life, for example, I have an adoption abandonment wound. My birth mother was 16 years old. She was unwed. And in 1953, that was not a real good situation. And I was taken by social services when I was 11 days old for failure to thrive. And I think I could sense some of the turmoil in the house. Her father was alcoholic. He couldn't keep a job down. He was often away for months with women, et cetera. So it was not a really good place to be raising a kid, as a 16-year-old unwed mother. The problem was I was put into that adoption home, and then my birth mother wouldn't sign the papers to let me go. So they wouldn't let me go back to her, but they wouldn't let me be adopted out because she hadn't signed the papers. So I got stuck in a baby dorm for 4 months. And I'm not looking for sympathy because I was adopted in the most wonderful, loving family. But the reality is, it was a hardship. And in fact, it was a hardship if you read Proof of Heaven, and especially if you read the third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, where we bring a lot of those threads together. You'll realize that was a tremendous challenge to me in my life. Many elements of it were subconscious. I wasn't even aware of the challenge, and yet they were there. And it was something I came to realize through meditation and through a lot of reflection about my NDE. And of course, my NDE was absolutely crucially involving
Mhm.
that adoption situation and, my birth family. And that was something I couldn't know. I didn't even meet my birth family until 1 year before my coma. But all that, it turns out, was essential for me to have that incredible recognition of the identity of that guardian angel who was present on my journey. So I won't say more about all that, but ultimately, that hardship of the adoption abandonment wound turned out to be a tremendous gift as all these pieces kind of came together in my life, and I came to recognize that I truly belonged and was loved. Um, that's just one example. There are others that I give in the books of hardships. Like another example that's fairly common is that I had to give up alcohol in 1991. It was very early in my career, and I never had any trouble with alcohol at work. But on my nights off call, I leaned pretty heavily on that scotch, and so it was time to stop. And I don't have any regrets about it. I look back on you know quitting alcohol is one of the greatest things I ever did for myself. And, so these hardships and difficulties are things to share with other people because they're out there in spades. And once people come to embrace the hardship, see themselves as a higher soul and not the victim of the little ego mentality, but they rise above all that, they can grow and transform through these kinds of events. So very important to embrace the hardships and difficulties, come to use a prayer and meditation, come into deeper alignment with that loving force at the core of the universe. And in my journey, I came back here recognizing that incredible force of love, that God force, was right at the core of my very conscious awareness. That's something I recognize at what I call the core realm, the deepest level I went to in my NDE. And also to point out that more than 90% of people who have had near-death experiences across all continents, across millennia, et cetera, more than 90% of them come back to this world, not just believing, but knowing and the reality of a loving force at the core of this universe. And it doesn't matter if you want to call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, all the many names that people attach to it, but to acknowledge the unity of love, kindness, compassion as qualities of that loving force that unites us all. And this is something that's very real and alive in the world today. This concept of an intelligence, a mind at the core of the universe. And, many religious people can call that whatever name they choose, but ultimately NDEs prove the reality of that. And by getting away from the ideological debates about which one is the better vision of God, acknowledge that all of them point to a very loving force that has our back, that we can trust. And that, I hope, is one of the best messages I can bring to this world, is that there are forces of love and kindness in this universe that have your back. And if you come in this world serving as a conduit and sharing that love, kindness, compassion, and mercy for others, the universe reflects it back to you. And this is where your life review will be a whole lot simpler than it would be if you just ignore all this and pretend, the materialist dream, get all the biggest toys before you die, is the way to live. No, I'm sorry, that's not the correct answer. There are better ways to live our lives, and that's what NDEs and the scientific study of consciousness is leading us towards.
I love your bringing to light there the importance of trying to embrace challenges in your life as transformational opportunities. I actually believe those are ascension opportunities, and actually that most of those challenging experiences are things that we've attracted that are mirroring or mimicking things in our other past lives timelines that we maybe didn't turn into transformational experiences or ascension experiences. So you change it in this one, and we remove that linear notion, false belief of time and the expansive timeline belief system. We heal them all. So we can we change in this one and we change them all. And then furthermore, digging into that part where you're talking about the first few years of each human's life, I even believe, well, really those experiences we attract to ourselves, challenges, that's kind of things, those are probably our more recent timeline life experiences. So like for those of us individually, we can reflect on that. And it's actually kind of a way to access maybe some other lives that we've experienced. But now, like you were talking about, Michelle, what's different now in this Aquarian age is that we can, as parents or like teachers or guides, when we see kids going through, we actually can, when they have a challenge or something weird happens or a conversation, or say they fall or whatever, almost drown, have a water accident, it gives us insight to probably what they're bringing in karmically from other lives. And we can actually, as a parent, be navigating this with awareness now, which is really a whole different ball game than it even was like, a kid's not going to have that right away, but that gives us a whole different vantage point of influence as like a sage or a wise parent or teacher to somebody like that.
Well,
Sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're supporting a heart and a soul, at that point.
Mm.
And that's really the heart-centered awareness. The heart's the portal, I think, for all of this, for all of what Dr. Alexander, is accessing. I mean, there are so many nuggets of tools for the toolbox, takeaways, learnings, and opportunities just in this brief time that we've spent together. And predominantly, I think that this also gives people hope. Sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity within our own hearts about what happens when we decide to leave the body. What happens? And to listen to the universality that, I mean, we've all heard the stories, we've all heard of NDEs, but to connect it on I would say, it, the medical side of this acknowledgement, I'm loving the convergence of medicine and heart-centered awareness and spirituality, because that is, I think, where we then begin to work with care of a soul and not just a patient or a person, and to me, as a Cancerian, like that's the nourishment that people need to thrive, to live empowered lives. And so just thank you for this opportunity in this brief window of time to help us to make some quantum shifts, just for how we might even approach, for instance, a funeral that you're heading to, being with small children, and also being in this now moment within your own life and daily practice, potentially, with meditation, with breath work, with prayer, with whatever is bringing you within, because you're not just the body, you're not just the mind, at all,
Right. It's
Uh,
that much
it's
bigger view that you're putting out there is absolutely on target. I mean, to see ourselves as these spiritual beings, we're part of the cosmic mind, the cosmic consciousness, and each and every one of us, I often liken it to a diamond, and the diamond is the one mind, and it's evolving. But each facet is an individual sentient being in a lifetime contributing, and then we shift. The facets shift. Our roles, in different lifetimes provide different ingredients. But as Scott's pointing out, all of this kind of contributes to our ability to see ourselves as interconnected souls that are actually promoting the transformation and evolution of cosmic consciousness itself. Kind of along the lines of what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote about in his book, The Phenomenon of Man, back in the mid-20th century. He recognized that evolution was happening. Back then, evolution was kind of the simple concepts of biological evolution, but he knew something much bigger was happening. So he wrote that book, and he was a French Jesuit priest, so he had a spiritual background, but he was also a paleontologist. He studied science with billion-year timescales. That's what he was used to, and he recognized that all of consciousness throughout the cosmos was in a process of evolution. And that's what we're all contributing to through our free will. Quantum indeterminacy is what takes us away from the slavery of predeterminism associated with Newtonian mechanics. But now with quantum physics, it's much clearer that there's a tremendous kind of open-ended possibility to the emerging future that has to do with entanglement, that has to do with that quantum field, that has to do with a mental field that interconnects us all, that we come to see at the time of bodily death. And all these kind of concepts, that's what we bring together in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And also people can learn a lot more if they visit on my website at Eben, EBEN Alexander.com, especially
Yes.
FAQ page. There are many interviews there, reading list, a lot of information about the books we've written about all this, especially Living in a Mindful Universe. That to me is the most important book because it brings the science and spirituality together. And they
I'm
strengthen.
ordering it. I'm ordering it as soon as my day is done. I'm ordering it for sure.
And another gift for your viewing audience, a free workbook that goes with that Living in a Mindful Universe, our third book. That workbook is on ebenalexander.com. When you get to the welcome page, 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. Click there, leave your first name and a email address, and you're off and running for 33 days. You'll get an email with a major concept out of that book. And then we've had more than 12,000 people take that course over the last few years. They leave comments there. So every day, every one of those 33 days, you got all these comments and people helping each other, et cetera. But it's a free workbook so people can get started in this understanding right away without spending a penny at 33-day journey at ebenalexander.com.
Ah, phenomenal. Thank you for this gift. Thank you so much, listener. I mean, that's incredible. Take definite opportunity.
Dr. Alexander, there's something else that you've been common thread driving home quite a bit today that I just wanted to examine briefly. Additionally,
Very briefly.
because you've been talking about belief, the importance of belief, and being an astrologer, and that Jupiter, we're in Cancer season, and Jupiter just moved into Cancer, and Jupiter is all about belief systems, renovating them. And even as you were talking about quantum there, I was dawning on me that how much belief affects quantum. I mean, the observer affects the result of an experiment, right? So that is belief, that's
Absolutely.
like direct the result of it there. And you mentioned at some point in today's talk how the other doctors were basically saying, how did this happen after drowning for 30 minutes or after your experience? And the answer was, well, they had a near-death experience. So I weirdly wonder, what is your feelings or your intuition on, do our belief systems, can our belief systems hold us back? Could that have held one of you back from having the near-death experience?
Totally.
Right. So
Very
your
good
belief
point.
systems were in line to have it, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I kind of mentioned that in our discussion today in talking about how important your beliefs are. And how
Yes.
people can get
Yeah.
stuck.
And it's right on time with the astrology.
And be stuck at the time of bodily
right.
death.
Yeah. And
because
people
they
don't advance.
They don't
Yeah.
get how they still exist, and they're confused about all that.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, that is a very
Yeah.
good point. But beliefs are important, and to me, as a physician, as a healer, the power of mind over matter and the power of belief. The best representation of it is in what we see in healing. Placebo effect is the beginning. Placebo effect is all about mind over matter,
Yeah.
but then you've got spontaneous remission of illnesses, and then you move on into miraculous healing and near-death experiences. There's a kind of a spectrum of progressive evidence of influence of mind over matter, spirit over matter, as Karen often reminds me. Spirit is more of a way of saying this kind of unified mind, the mind that we share, the cosmic mind. But that's where meditation and centering prayer can be so powerful and can help us to basically manifest the world of our dreams. So excellent point to be making there. Power of belief. And this is where meditation and centering prayer is so important. And remember, your little ego mind is not your friend in this journey. That's where meditation is very handy. The ego is all about fear and anxiety, and that's where addictions get thrown in and all this kind of very toxic ingredients of modern life. But to escape those things is simply to realize that your ego is not who you are. Your higher soul is something you can come into greater communication and contact with through meditation, centering, prayer, reflection. You get deep into your subconscious, dream work. Meditation is all about getting into a hypnagogic space, the same space we're in between awake and asleep. And that's a place where your ego no longer drives the conversation. If it is, you're awake, but you're not really awake. You awaken by going deep and connecting with that higher soul, and then exploring where that takes you in terms of a manifestation of the world of your dreams.
Yeah. So to our listeners, again, it's a great tool that Dr. Alexander just offered, and the astrology is really there for you right now, supporting you to re-examine your belief systems over this next 12 months. You really have a big opportunity to connect Cancer being about the feelings and emotions, which can bring us out of the egoic mind into a better connection with our higher form of intelligence, which is our heart and our gut.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
Well put. Thank you. Dr. Alexander, thank you so much for shining your light with us today, for helping us, just to bring comfort, clarity, and courage to a world that deeply, deeply needs this. And just to remember, y'all, let your light shine, let your heart be your guide. As we cross over into this Leo season right now, remember your light is needed. Your heart is needed. This has been an incredible dive. We have heard how to reach Dr. Alexander, and Noah's going to, as always, drop a link so we can access him quite easily. This has been Empowerment Unleashed Now, and until next time, stay open, stay brave, and stay empowered. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Empowerment Unleashed Now. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and let us know how this helped you.
Join us right here every week for another episode.